Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Making It in Manhattan. Today we're going to be talking about 13 things I've learned so far working in the fashion industry. Even if you don't work in the fashion industry and you work in another industry, you can definitely apply all of these tips to you as well. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in because this is a list that I've compiled over the years. Also, if you read my book, I talk about a lot of these tips in there as well. But with the podcast, the thing that I love is that I can just go into more detail on each and every one of these and tell you guys some stories and things that I've been through and experienced. So my first tip is to be determined. I know that might sound silly, but in the fashion industry, something that I need to tell you guys is it doesn't just happen overnight. Personally, I did not have a job lined up after college, which was super nerve-wracking. As you guys know, I did several internships, had my first styling job, and for me, I just always kind of loved feeling like I was a step ahead of the game and that I had all of my ducks in a row. So when I was applying for jobs, I started applying for jobs even while I was still in college. I drove into the city a few times, did some interviews, and every single person I met with, pretty much the answer was, well, reach back out once you've graduated. Nobody wanted to hire me yet without being out of college, especially I think because I went to college in Pennsylvania. It was a little bit too risky, like I was too far away. They didn't know the exact start date, even though I was like, I'll start right after graduation. So anyway, my point being is you've got to be determined. It is not going to just happen overnight. You're not going to, hey, if you get the first job you interview for, that is absolutely amazing. But I graduated, and as soon as I graduated, I reached back out to everybody and anybody I knew in the industry. And I was pretty much like, hi, I'm here now. I'm back in New York. I'm out of college. And then that's when I started going on interviews. And I did a ton of interviews. I can remember interviewing at Glamour for a freelance fashion assistant position and feeling so good about it and thinking that I definitely got the job and then never hearing back, like literally getting ghosted. So with that being said, you just need to not let it crush your spirit and not let it stop you, because if I had given up back then and just thrown in the towel, who knows where we'd be now. So with the fashion industry, I think, I hear from people all the time, I'm applying for internships, I'm reaching out, I'm contacting, all these postings I'm seeing online. You've gotta stick with it, because I feel like sometimes in life, right when you're about to give up is what I like to say is right when the miracle happens. Like it can even be in dating, it can be in your career, it can be with anything. But right when you're about to throw in the towel and just give up is when something good happens. And so for me, what eventually ended up happening was I was reaching out to all these different magazines, emailing everybody I knew, and I reached out to somebody at Teen Vogue. They said that nothing was available at that time, but they'd be back in contact in a couple months or weeks when something did open. And so again, like staying positive, not giving up, and being like, it's going to work out. I think I personally love manifesting, and I want to talk more about manifesting down the road. I think manifesting is so important, and sometimes manifesting for me is just having like a blind sense of optimism. So I used to walk around and be like, this is going to happen. Like, not, oh, I hope it happens. It's like, no, I am going to get a fashion assistant job at a major magazine. Like, and I just would say it over and over again, and I would repeat it and repeat it in my mind. And it's funny, I didn't even really realize it was manifesting until I was talking to a friend about it. This was years ago. And they were like, that's literally manifesting. You are speaking it into existence. You're saying it over and over again. You're believing it with your whole heart, and you're essentially not going to let anything stand in your way. So eventually, when I heard back from Teen Vogue, I did hear back weeks later, and they did have a job opening. And, I think I've talked about this before, but I was like, I will start tomorrow. So at the end, and they hired me, and I started the next day. So with that being said, be determined. Don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. It will happen even when it feels like all hope is lost, or when I was graduating, everyone else in other industries and in other majors had jobs lined up, and I just felt like so hopeless and almost like a failure because I had worked so hard. I had done all of these internships. I felt like I had done everything right. So to not have something lined up after graduation for me just felt like absolutely heartbreaking. But everything happens for a reason, and me not getting a job before graduation and waiting for that Teen Vogue job, that led me to where I am now. One of my favorite sayings that I always remind myself is no just means not right now. And I think when you adjust your mindset to tell yourself that, I know again, blind optimism, but it really helps you see things differently. So for example, say you reach out to a company and, you get a no. They say no, but then 2 years from now, you have more experience under your belt, you've built up your resume a bit, you reach back out. It could now be a yes. So with the right planning, just like taking the right steps, doing the right things, even for me sometimes, it's funny, companies I've applied for back in the day that were a no, now I get to work with as a creator and as an influencer. So no always just means not right now. And when you adjust your mindset, that no isn't so final. It's not such like a final answer. It just is an opportunity for you to work harder, readjust, refocus, and eventually you can change that no to a yes. So always keep that in mind. My next tip is you have to love it, especially in the fashion industry. Something that I can just tell you guys it is a 24/7 job. Like, I know the Devil Wears Prada depicts like Andy running around and working crazy hours and booking flights in thunderstorms, but it's not like that all the time. But it is a 24/7 job. Like with what I do, there isn't just, okay, at 5 p.m., clock off, it's done. So with that being said, I think you really need to love it because it's going to become a part of your life and just a part of who you are. Like, I love sharing my life with everyone. And I think it's funny. I look back at like Facebook statuses of mine from 10, 12 years ago, and I was always a chronic oversharer. So I just think that I am doing exactly what I was meant to do. But with that being said, you need to love it because it becomes part of you. And I always tell myself that, but even Betsey Johnson told me that. And so a story I want to tell you guys is in 2015, when I was working at InStyle magazine, Betsey Johnson actually had her last fashion show ever at New York Fashion Week. And it's the only show of hers that I actually got to attend in person. I grew up, I would watch all of her runway shows on YouTube. She was like one of my biggest inspirations for working in the fashion industry. So when I was working at InStyle, I got an invite to her last fashion show ever. And I'm so thankful that I just got to experience one in person. But anyway, I got to interview her backstage before the show. And I asked her a ton of things. Honestly, I really should go online and try to find that article again. But one of the quotes that stuck with me is I was just asking her advice for young kids starting out in the industry that wanted to follow in her footsteps. And she literally said to me, you have to work hard and you have to love it. And coming from, one of my biggest inspirations' mouths, I truly, can just attest to it and sticks with me in my heart. You need to love it. It becomes part of your life. I'm sure, Betsey Johnson, she, as an iconic designer, her life revolves around her work and designing and creating, and it's just part of who she is. So your work essentially becomes part of you. So just make sure you really, really love it. And if you don't, there's a million other career paths out there that you can try out and go down different roads and experiment until you find what you do love. It could be being a doctor. It could be being a lawyer. It could be anything, being a teacher. Just make sure you truly love what you do, because at the end of the day, we end up working a lot of our lives. Once you graduate college, and that's something that I didn't even realize at the time, but I am thankful for. So I graduated in May of 2014, and I didn't get my first job until the beginning of July. So I had a good month and change off just after college, just didn't have a job. And I look back at that time, and though I was stressed about finding a job and I was emailing incessantly, I remember going to the beach with friends and just going out for random lunches and doing things during that time that, like, once you start working, you don't get to necessarily do all the time. So with that being said, if you want to take a little bit of time off after graduation and have a couple of months or even a year to just enjoy life a little bit, take that time, because once you start working, you're going to work forever. You're going to work the rest of your life. So that being said, make sure that you truly, truly love it. My next tip is don't forget to just stay humble. One of my biggest things that I tell myself is remember that feeling you felt on the first day of your internship or your first job, and you were like so meek and humble and scared and you didn't know anything. Like, keep that feeling with you forever. That feeling of you're just so happy to be there. You're just so thankful to be there, excited to be there. Like, that humbleness, keep that with you your entire career, no matter if you are now the VP of a company, a high up executive, a president, whatever it might be. You want to keep that humbleness with you because it keeps you hungry. It keeps you eager to work hard, to want more. And also, you just want to be nice to people. Like, this industry is so small. You don't want to be that person that everyone's like, oh, I hate being around them. Like, they don't make me feel good. I always say you might not remember what people said, but you'll always remember how they made you feel. Like, I'll think back to things people said to me or made me feel really bad at an event or when I was working full time. And I might not remember the exact way they said it or the exact words, but I'll remember that I felt just like so terrible after they said something to me. So you don't want to be that person. And, we all have bad days. Don't get me wrong, where you're just like, oh, I snapped at someone and I regret that. Like, I wish I didn't do that. But with that being said, just stay humble, stay kind, and just stay grounded, because life moves too fast. I don't know. I just always want to be nice, and I always want to give people a warm feeling when they see me. One of my first jobs in this industry was as a creator, as an influencer, was a digital commercial that I did with Wendy's. And I was like so excited. It was the first job that like I got hair and makeup done, and there was a stylist and like a full team of people. And we shot from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So like a full day long, and I was the only talent of the video. And after it ended at 9 p.m., I made it a point. I went up to every single person there that was working, even like the interns and the assistants, and just said, thank you for being here. Thank you for, working so hard and giving your whole day for this job. And I can remember when I went up to like the interns and the assistants, they were like shocked that I, not because I was mean or anything, but just, I don't know, maybe people don't walk up and say thank you all the time. So, with that being said, like that little thank you, maybe they'll remember that in a good way. Like they'll remember how that made them feel. So you always want to be the person that makes other people feel good and make someone else smile, because you never know what someone's going through. So just always be nice to others. Speaking of holding that feeling with you of like when you first started out in your career, one of my favorite things to do during Fashion Week is I go to tons of shows. I'm running around. I'm in New York. I'm in Paris. And sometimes you just get like on autopilot during Fashion Week and you're like a robot just running around. And you sometimes forget like, wow, I am at New York Fashion Week. I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. This is an absolute dream come true. So what I do to kind of keep myself grounded and to like snap myself back into reality is one of my absolute favorite parts of every single fashion show I go to is you walk in and it's like that pre-show excitement. The lights are dark and like everyone's rushing around to find their seats. Then you sit down, you're in your seat, and right before the show starts, they shut off the lights and there's just like probably, I'm going to say 30 seconds of absolute silence, and it's dark and it's silent and everyone's just like anticipating, waiting for the show to start. Like you can feel like literally the excitement in your chest. So what I do during that time is I quickly close my eyes. I'm like doing it right now. Close my eyes and I take like a deep breath. I go like, honestly, this feels good right now. We should all take a deep breath together. If you're rushing and commuting to work right now, let's all just take one deep breath together because this feels good. Ready? In through your nose, Okay, that out through your mouth. That felt so good. Anyway, I do that a couple of times right in that moment of silence, right before the show's about to start. And like, I close my eyes, and when I'm closing my eyes, I like almost just picture myself like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And I picture that little girl, like, and how in awe she would be of like everything that I'm doing, all the experiences I'm having, and that I'm literally sitting at a fashion show. So if that's something that'll help you, sometimes maybe you're sitting at your desk, maybe you're rushing around to meetings, maybe you're on set for a photo shoot, whatever it might be, take a minute. You can even, if you're at an office, you can run over to the bathroom real quick, sit in a stall by yourself for a minute, just take a couple deep breaths and like picture your younger self and just remind yourself like how proud they would be of you. Because I think sometimes we forget that. We're like, now, as I said, executives, presidents, whatever it might be, you forget to think back like, oh my gosh, little 14-year-old Caroline, influencing didn't even exist when I was younger. Like if she could see what I was doing now, she would just be so proud. So always be proud of yourself and celebrate the little wins. And I think when you do that, like that just helps you want to be nice to others and help others and lift others up. And there's people who I worked with at Teen Vogue who I still work with now and who I'm still in touch with now. And it's because we've kept great relationships and we've always just been kind to one another. Like one of my old coworkers now works at Cosmo. And recently, a couple months ago, Dave and I were in the latest issue of Cosmo. And it was because this old coworker friend of mine remembered me and like knew what I was doing now and just texted me and was like, hey, it's me. Like, would you want to be in an issue of Cosmo? And how insanely cool is that? So I think just when you're nice to others and you have good energy, you attract more good energy into your life. My next tip is never be afraid to speak up. And I know that can be hard, especially if you're just an assistant or an intern. Speaking up can be so scary. I can remember like back in the day, if I had something that I needed to ask my boss or a question that I just wanted to double check, I would like rehearse it so many times in my mind because I was afraid. I didn't want to sound dumb. I didn't want to like whatever, ask the wrong question. I think something that's important is like there are no dumb questions because I'd rather ask a question than make a mistake. I'd always rather go up to my boss and be like, hey, just want to double check this thing real quick rather than doing it wrong. So don't be afraid to speak up, ask questions. One of the things that I think back on that's a good example of this is when I was interning at Marie Claire. There was a week where my boss was going to be out of office. She was going to Miami for swim week. And during that time, like before she left, we honestly like got all of her work like in a row so that when she was there, she could really like relax and, not have to stress. So she told me, she was like, hey, I'm going to be gone for like a week. You can like work less or maybe not come in as many days because we really got everything lined up before she left. But instead of being like, sure, I'll just take off and, whatever, I was a kid, I could just enjoy the city during the summer. I asked if I could work in a different department while she was gone. So I was an assistant to, or an intern assistant to a fashion editor. But I asked if I could assist in the beauty department at Marie Claire for a couple of days that week. And she was like, that is such a good idea. That's so great that you're like taking the initiative to learn about other departments and get your foot in the door and also meet other people in different departments. And so I was nervous to ask that because I was afraid she was going to be like, no. But also, if she said no, what's the worst that could happen? I tried. And I think that's one of the biggest things in life. We're always afraid of the no or the rejection, but you won't know unless you ask. And I always remind myself in life that no one is going to stand up for you or cheer for you bigger than you will. We all have to be our biggest advocates and we have to fight for ourselves more than anything, because no one else is going to do it. So if you want something, if you have an idea that you want to share or whatever it might be, don't be afraid to speak up and share your opinion because you never know where it could lead. Like if you're in, I don't know, a creative meeting with your bosses and they say, hey, does anyone have a good idea? maybe you have a good idea, but you're just so afraid to share it. I've been there, believe me. I can remember being in like pitch meetings where we would pitch ideas for InStyle.com when I worked there for different articles. And I'd always be so afraid to like share my ideas. But eventually I just got to a point where I would like wait for others to go, because it made me feel better like when other people went already. And then I'd be like, I have some ideas. And then the more I did it, the more comfortable I got. And eventually my bosses would be like, these are great ideas, like share your ideas. So that being said, don't be afraid to speak up, share your ideas. You never know where it could lead or what doors it could open. My next tip is to always just stay true to yourself. I know that might be cliche, but for me, I've built my entire brand around trying to be an original, and it's worked. I mean, there's so many people out there, so many people in the world sharing their style, sharing their story. So be yourself. I think that's one of my biggest tips and tricks is like, don't try to just fit in, copy trends, and try to be like everybody else, because there's already a million people out there. What makes you you is what makes you special and what makes you stand out. And that is what will make you be successful eventually down the road. Like just being yourself and sharing yourself and your journey with the world. I also think with staying true to yourself, like make sure you really love what you're doing and love where you're working. Like don't just compromise that. And I think doing internships and trying out different things down the road will really help you figure out, what do I love in my career? What don't I love so much in my career? And that'll help you stay true to yourself as well. Because if you're stuck in a job that just doesn't feel like you, isn't something that's fulfilling. And believe me, we all have to have at least one or two bad jobs to help us lead us to the good jobs down the road. So, it's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies, and you're not just always going to have your dream job. But I think if you, in the back of your mind, stay true to yourself and in your heart remind yourself, okay, this isn't the end all be all. Like there are more things I want to do down the road. Like staying true to yourself and just making sure you always keep your dreams at the forefront of your mind. Don't compromise who you are. Don't give up. Like staying true to just yourself in terms of like who you are, showing your style is a part of staying true to yourself, and then staying true to yourself in your heart and what you want and your dreams, and not compromising them for anyone else or being like, I'm just going to stay in this job because it pays the rent, which honestly, sometimes you got to do for a little bit. But I think if you stay true to yourself and fight for what you want and fight for your dreams, you'll ultimately just be happier down the road. My next tip is, of course, one of my absolute favorites, and it is just always dress to impress. If you're just starting out in your career and you're an intern, always still dress super nice. Put your best foot forward. You never know who you're going to bump into, who you're going to see. And I'm not saying you need a lot of money to buy expensive things, because we've talked about this a lot. We just did our whole episode about vintage shopping and thrift shopping. So if you haven't listened to that, make sure to go check it out, because I talk all about how you can't buy style. You can buy fashion, but you cannot buy style. So you can find super amazing things at good prices, but always dress to impress. Put your best foot forward. Like, what is that saying? It's like dress as if you're going to like run into your worst enemy or something like that. Like, always do that. Why not? Dress as if you're going to run into your ex. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to work, you're meeting people. I remember when I interned at Anna Sui, my first internship, I had gone out and bought just like a couple of cute things, probably from like Saks Off Fifth or like one of those stores, TJ Maxx. But every day I was like putting together cute looks with beads and fun earrings and like trying my best. I was still experimenting with my style and trying to find myself. But I can remember like bumping into like my boss and like my boss's boss all the time at this internship. And they would always be like, you always look so cute. And like, it really like stuck out to them. They remembered it, that I wasn't just showing up like, I don't know, just like throwing stuff together. Like I was really trying my best to like look good, to fit the part. And I always say dress for the job you want, not the job you have. So like, yeah, I was only an intern, but I wanted to be, I don't know, whatever. At the time, I thought I wanted to maybe be a designer or work in the showroom and like work with magazines and showing the products to the different editors. Who knows? But Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Just because you're an intern doesn't mean you need to dress like you're an intern, but you also don't need to go out and spend tons of money on expensive things. Just putting yourself together in a nice way and looking professional and always putting your best foot forward. I also personally always just feel better when I'm all dressed up. So it could be a super early morning. I could have a super, super early meeting, or when you're working 9 to 5, you could have a super early day and you're just like, I don't want to be here right now. I'm so tired. I don't feel good, whatever it might be. I want to be back in bed. But the second you put on like a colorful, bright, fun outfit, it just makes you feel a type of way. And once you start walking down the street and shredding your stuff, and people see that confidence, they're drawn to you to just come up and compliment you and want to talk to you and ask you where you got your look. So as we talk about, fashion is the armor to like survive everyday life. So every day we are putting on our armor, we are stepping outside, and we are fighting the world and putting our best foot forward. I also always like to say, fake it till you make it. That's always one of my other favorite sayings. And when you're just starting out in the industry, like one of the best ways you can do that is through fashion. Like if you're putting yourself together and looking super chic and buttoned up and professional, no one knows what your job is. Like you could walk into an event and look so amazing. One of my favorite yet most embarrassing stories is when I was working at Teen Vogue. I was the assistant to the fashion director. The assistant to the fashion director. I want to highlight assistant. But it was during New York Fashion Week, and she let me go to a show for her. And I wore this vintage Betsey Johnson dress. It was purple with like blue and white and pink flowers all over it. And then I paired the dress with my blue Manolo Blahnik Hangisis that Dave had gotten me as a birthday gift. It was like one of my only designer shoes at the time that I even owned. But so with that being said, I looked very nice and I looked very put together. So at the show, a photographer came up to me and was like, "Hey, can I take a photo of you? You look so nice." And so I let them take my photo, and it was for Getty Images, which is essentially like an image database online. And a lot of times at events, they send photographers who then they put the images on the website. So after he took my photo, he asked me for my name, and I said, Caroline Vazzana. And then he said, "What is your role?" And I said, "The assistant to the fashion director at Teen Vogue." That's what I said. I'll never forget it. The photo gets published online. It says, Caroline Vazzana, fashion director of Teen Vogue. And I'm like, oh my God, I hope my boss doesn't see this, because I wasn't going around like claiming I was obviously I was literally 21, like insane. But I'm like, maybe just because I was dressed really cute and nice, like it was believable in some sense that this 21-year-old girl could be I don't know. To this day, maybe if you go on Getty and you guys search for the image, you can find it. I'm still so embarrassed about that. But with that being said, fake it till you make it. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Always put your best foot forward, and it'll just make you feel more confident and better about yourself in the end. And my last tip for this episode is just to always remember it's not always going to be glamorous. And I really want to emphasize that, because working in the fashion industry and with social media just glamorizes everything. It makes you think that right away you're just going to be attending events and going to photo shoots and that it's all super, super glamorous. But it's really not. In my first few jobs, I was making photocopies, getting coffee, essentially just doing anything and everything my bosses needed, and always doing it with a smile. I think just no matter how little the task is, do it to the best of your ability and just being happy to be there. Like, when I was at Teen Vogue, I'll never forget, one of like my worst tasks that I was assigned was we were doing a photo shoot at Rockaway Beach. And the day before, like a lot of the brands who we had requested clothing from still had not confirmed yet. And I think sometimes being a teen magazine, they'd give like preference to like Vogue and Elle and Glamour, so that Teen Vogue was kind of like, you know, if we have something from Prada, then we'll send it to you. So everything was getting confirmed like super, super last minute. And my boss essentially asked me if the next morning at like 9 a.m. I would run around to a bunch of different offices like Calvin Klein, Michael Kors, Prada, Miu Miu, pick up items, and then jump on the subway and take the subway to Rockaway Beach to drop off all the items at the photo shoot. At this time, I was not good with the subway at all. I was not familiar with it at all. Like, the idea of doing all these pickups and then taking all this expensive clothing that far on the subway was like so scary to me. I was like, I'm gonna lose it or get robbed or like something as bad is gonna happen. And then my other question was, okay, well, once I take the subway all the way out to Rockaway, like how far is it from the subway? Like, can I just like walk there? They're like, yeah, you can walk once you get there. And also it'll only be a couple of things. So like it's easy. Because my other question was, can I manage all of it? I'm one person. Can I manage it on the subway? Long story short, I go to the first pickup at Calvin Klein and they hand me 2 huge stuffed garment bags, like filled with clothing. So already I'm like, I can barely carry this, and okay, like with that, I could take the subway. Then I go to Michael Kors and I'm like, hi, I'm here to pick up from Teen Vogue. They're like, oh, are you going to be able to manage all this? I'm like, what do you mean manage all of this? How many bags is it? They come out with like 2 huge shopping bags. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to take this on the subway. Like I could barely walk with it all. It was like so much. So then I go to Prada and I'm like, listen, like I get the stuff, but then I'm like talking to my bosses and I'm like, I can't take this on the subway. Like I could barely like function with it all. Like now, let alone like go on the subway. So eventually they're like, okay, you can take an Uber there or whatever. And then like, we'll figure it out. I never got reimbursed for that Uber. I just went the other, but whatever. But anyway, I take an Uber all the way there and I like can see when we pass the subway. So once we pass the subway in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, let me see now how far it is from the subway. Because they had assured me I could, take the subway and then walk. No. It was another 20 minutes from the subway. So like I couldn't have taken like the subway and then walked like it's just so funny. So anyway, then I get to the set. Literally, and it was such a long journey. I literally walk up there like, thanks. They like take it and they're like you can go now. Like I think they gave me one thing to like bring back because it needed to be returned. So I did take the subway back. I took an Uber though to the subway because I was like, I'm not going to be able to like walk. So with that being said though, I never complained. I never said anything. Like I got back. My boss was like, how'd it go? I was like, good. Just like did it, smiled, happy to be there. But like I was so nervous. I'll never forget that moment because I was so scared, like just genuinely like I didn't also want to complain. I didn't want to let anybody down. I think I'm very big on like I never want to let anyone down or do anything wrong. So that was just like an absolutely crazy. That was probably my like one like Devil Wears Prada experience, but it wasn't even that. It wasn't that bad. It just was more like nerve-wracking of how I was going to get there. So anyway, now I'm going off. It's not always going to be glamorous. I'm like, so what am I going on this tangent? It's not always going to be glamorous. And I think just keeping that in mind as you get started in the industry and you get your foot in the door and you're getting your first few jobs, like it's not always going to be roses and butterflies. It's going to be a lot of hard work and it's worth it though in the end. Like if you love it, and you want this and you want to work in the fashion industry, like it's all good stories now. Like look at me. I'm sitting here like telling you about that traumatic experience of me going into the Rockaways. But in the moment I didn't think, oh, one day I'm going to have a podcast and I can talk about this. In the moment I'm like teary-eyed because I'm like, I don't want to get fired. But everything happens for a reason and it all works out in the end. So just keep that in mind as you're working. You're having a bad day, just be like the Caroline Rockaway Beach story. Keep that in the back of your brain and it'll help push you through to the next job. So my making it in Manhattan tip of the week is there is no one particular path that you have to take to make it in the fashion industry. So pave your own path, try out different roles, find what you love and what works for you, and say yes to new opportunities that just feel right for you and go from there. There's no one path to success ever in life. It's going to be rocky. It's going to be crazy. There's ups and downs, subway rides, train rides, taxi rides. Like it's going to be all over the place. But just say yes to new opportunities. Try out new things and always be open. Like you never know. I think one of my favorite things about my job now is just saying yes to new and exciting things and trying things that push me out of my comfort zone and that scare me. So always do something that scares you a little bit. I want to do a whole other episode about this sometime, but as I get older and I get comfortable in my job, I always want to do something that scares me a little bit or that just like pushes me outside of my comfort zone. Public speaking, like whatever it might be, something that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because it helps you grow as a person and to grow in your career. So now my making it in Manhattan question for this episode is, so many people apply for the same jobs and internships. I feel you. And I'm scared my application will just get lost in a sea of candidates. How can I stand out when applying for jobs or internships? I feel you entirely. Like that is how I felt when I was just starting out. And I was mentioning in the beginning of this episode, like I was applying for all these different jobs. I was applying at Glamour and Interview and Elle and Vogue. And like, I felt like I wasn't hearing back. I was getting ghosted and I was just getting lost in the pile. So like, feel you there. I think some things you can do are like really work on like tailoring your resume and cover letters. I don't know. I feel like they're kind of a thing of the past, but like your cover letter is essentially like the body of your email that you're sending. So like really tailor those to fit the company you're applying to. Do your research, make sure that you're like up and up on what's going on. Like if I get an email from somebody who is applying for an assistant role with me, an internship, writing for the website, whatever it might be, if they email me and the body of the email feels really like they know me, like they've been watching the podcast, they've been following along on TikTok, they've read my book. Like if the person hiring you that's reading over the application feels like you really did your research, they can feel like, sometimes I can really feel the person's love for the company, like through the computer screen. If I'm reading a cover letter, body of an email, that's just like, feels so personal, like they really know about me and about the company and what I'm doing and X, Y, and Z, like that'll make me want to email them back and talk to them. If I feel like it's just another generic email, copy and pasted, and just feels like something they mass emailed out to hundreds of people, like it's just not as personal. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Don't get me wrong, I know that's a lot of work. You're like, Caroline, that's so much work to tailor every single one to every single company. But I do think in the long run, it will really help you stand out and will help you stand out. Just like you said, like you feel like there's so many people applying, which there are. But I think finding ways that you can stand out, really, fixing up your social media, making sure your social media is really a good reflection of you and the person that you want the company to see. And maybe you're applying for a styling job or a writing job. Have your Instagram and your social medias like reflect that you're interested in fashion and that you're interested in writing and in styling. And because I look at everyone's social media, when people apply for something with me, like my instant thought is click, like I want to see them on social media and I just want to see what they're like and like what their interests are. So if your social media like looks like, ooh, like they love fashion and they love color and they're into all the things that I love and I'm into, like just making sure you literally are like a sparkling candidate for their company. I think those are the things that I could tell you to do. And then, as I said, like number one tip I talked about today, just be determined. Like it's going to feel like there's a million people applying and there's a million candidates and I'm never going to get a job. Like I used to feel that way and I used to be so hard on myself, but it will happen. Divine timing, like everything happens when it is meant to happen. So just please keep that in mind if you're feeling discouraged right now in your job search process. So that is a wrap on this week's episode of Making It in Manhattan. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to stay tuned next week for part 2 of 13 things I've learned so far working in the fashion industry. Leave me a comment, send me suggestions for future episodes, and I will see you guys soon.